The diner buzzed with clinking glasses and muffled conversations, the kind of place where no one paid attention to the waitress moving quietly between tables. Her smile was polite, her steps practiced, her presence barely noticed. But at one corner booth, a pair of eyes followed her every move. He knew that face. Years ago, they had sat in the same classrooms, shared the same dreams, and promised a future would be theirs. Now, he was a billionaire. His name in headlines, his wealth untouchable. And she? She was refilling water glasses, unseen by the very world that once praised her brilliance. But what stunned him most wasn't her job, it was the weight in her eyes. The silent story they carried. A story of doors shut, chances stolen, and a system that had failed her. And as their paths crossed again in that diner, the truth was about to surface. What happened next would shake them both. Life had a way of wearing people down so slowly. They barely realized how far they had drifted from their dreams. For Maya, that slow erosion showed up in aching feet, calloused hands, and the daily grind of a diner that smelled of grease and cheap coffee. At 27, she moved like someone older, practiced in the rhythm of survival. Customers barely glanced at her. She was the invisible figure clearing tables, balancing trays, offering polite smiles that never quite reached her eyes. But once long ago she had been anything but invisible. Back in high school, Maya had been a force. Teachers marveled at her sharpness, the way she devoured books, the ease with which she debated topics that left others stumbling. Her essays weren't just good, they were electric, layered with passion and clarity. Guidance counselors whispered about law school. Her friends joked that she would someday change the world. And perhaps the person who believed in her most was Daniel Carter. Daniel wasn't like most of the other kids. While many kept their distance, uncomfortable with Maya's presence in honors classes, Daniel always sat next to her. He laughed at her sarcastic jokes, quizzed her before exams, and shared his own ambitious dreams, how he wanted to build something big, something that would leave his name stamped across skylines. They were an unlikely pair, but together, they felt unstoppable. Someday, Maya had said once, sitting with him on the cracked bleachers behind their school, "I'll stand in a courtroom and argue for people like us. People who don't get hurt." Daniel had grinned, tossing a football between his hands. "And I'll be the guy funding it, the billionaire who backs the causes that matter." Back then, their futures seemed wide open, but cracks had already begun to form. Teachers praised Maya to her face, but she overheard their whispers, comments about how remarkable she was for someone like her. Scholarships she applied for mysteriously slipped away to students with lower grades but better connections. And when she toured college campuses, she saw the way professors looked past her, as if she had wandered somewhere she didn't belong. Daniel's path looked different. He had doors that opened easily, parents who could make phone calls, friends whose last names carried weight. He worked hard, yes, but the world also bent itself to his ambition, giving him chances Maya could only dream of. When senior year ended, they promised to keep in touch. But life has a cruel way of separating those who start on the same line but run very different races. Daniel went off to a top university, then to Silicon Valley, where his ideas were met with investors and opportunity. Maya stayed home, juggling community college classes with part-time jobs. Bills piled up. Family crises demanded her attention. Semester after semester slipped away until finally, the dream of law school dimmed to a memory. By 22, she was working full-time at the diner. At first, she told herself it was temporary, just until she got back on her feet. But the months turned 2 years, and soon she was known not as the brilliant girl from honors English, but as the waitress who's always here. And though she wore the uniform, though she smiled and nodded, the sting of injustice never left her. Every time she watched customers treat her with impatience, every time she heard colleagues whisper about troublemakers when speaking of people who looked like her, she felt the quiet truth pressing in. Her talent hadn't failed her. The system had. Still, Maya carried herself with dignity. She read at night, borrowing stacks of books from the library, law, history, stories of resistance. She still dreamed, even if those dreams felt fragile now. locked away in a part of her heart she tried not to touch. And then came that night. The diner was unusually crowded, full of tourists, families, and men in expensive suits whose laughter cut across the room. Maya tied her apron tighter and balanced her tray, moving quickly between tables. It was the same as always, or so it seemed. But in the far corner, a man sat watching her dotty first. She didn't recognize him. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his posture straight, his presence commanding. But when their eyes met, something familiar tugged at her. A memory. A face she once knew well. Her breath caught. Daniel. The same Daniel who once told her she was brilliant. The boy who promised they would both change the world. Except now, he wasn't a boy anymore. He was a billionaire. The kind whose face appeared in magazines. The kind who signed checks that shifted industries. And there she was taking his order. Maya's heart pounded as she scribbled the words on her notepad. She wanted to speak, to smile, to remind him of who she had been. But something in his expression stopped her. He looked surprised. Yes, but also uncomfortable. As if her presence was inconvenient, even embarrassing. She turned quickly, tray in hand, but the memory of his eyes burned into her. What would come of this unexpected reunion? Would it bring back the friendship they once shared, or expose a painful truth about the world that had pushed them onto such different paths? The first night Daniel returned, Maya told herself it was coincidence. Maybe he liked the diner's privacy, or maybe it was just convenient. He sat with two men in sleek suits, their conversations clipped and hurried. Maya avoided his table as long as possible, her heart hammering whenever she caught his eye. But eventually, duty pulled her there. "Water, please," Daniel said simply. His tone was polite, but cold, nothing like the warmth she remembered from the boy on the bleachers. His companions barely looked at her, speaking about stocks and investments as though she weren't there. She placed the glasses on the table, nodded, and walked away, but she could feel it, that look. His eyes on her, not cruel, not kind, but detached, like he was seeing her for the first time and erasing the memory of who she once was. That night, Maya lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying it over and over. Why hadn't he said her name? Why hadn't he smiled? Surely he remembered. Surely he knew. The second night he came, her dread was sharper. This time he wasn't alone. He brought 4 investors, all men, all older, all radiating the smugness of people used to being served. Maya greeted them as she did every customer, but she couldn't ignore the whispers. "Not exactly the image you'd want in front of investors," one of them muttered, glancing at her as though she were part of the furniture. Her cheeks burned, but she kept her expression still. She'd learned to live with comments like that, quiet cuts slipped between polite words. What made it worse was the silence beside them. Daniel heard. She knew he heard, but he didn't correct them. He didn't remind them that the woman taking their orders had once been his equal, his friend, his peer. He just sat there, nodding along, sipping his drink. Later that evening, Maya overheard Daniel speaking to her manager. His words weren't harsh, but they pierced like glass. "If you're going to attract higher clientele," he said, "your staff should reflect it. Presentation matters. Presentation." A word that wasn't about uniforms or efficiency, it was about her. She felt it in the way her manager's eyes lingered on her later, his sigh heavy with unspoken meaning. "Just make sure you're keeping up appearances," he told her, adjusting his tie. The words were soft, but the judgment behind them was not. That night, the bus ride home felt longer than ever. The streets blurred outside the window, her reflection staring back at her, a young woman who once dreamed of law school, now reduced to an afterthought in the eyes of someone who once swore she was destined for greatness. Still, Maya refused to let bitterness swallow her. She returned the next night, shoulders squared, chin high. But the whispers followed. Co-workers glanced at her with pity, some with quiet judgment. Word had spread. The billionaire wasn't impressed with her. And in a place where tips meant survival, perception was everything. Days passed, and Daniel kept coming back. Each visit chipped at her resolve. She caught fragments of conversations, business deals, expansions, luxury retreats, words that floated above her life like another world entirely. Each time she served him, she felt the growing divide between what she had been and what she had become. Then came the night that would push everything to the edge. The diner was packed wall to wall, the hum of conversation loud, the air thick with the smell of fried food. Daniel arrived with a group larger than ever before, 8 men this time, their laughter booming as they filled the corner booth. Maya's stomach knotted when she saw them. She took their orders with practiced calm, hiding the storm inside. As she returned with a tray of drinks, the crowd shifted. A chair leg jutted unexpectedly, catching her hip. In a flash, balance betrayed her. The tray tilted, glasses slid, and then crash. Wine splattered across the polished table, dripping down onto the tailored suit of one of Daniel's companions. Shards of glass clinked against the floor, and the diner fell silent. The man leapt to his feet, his face twisting with fury. "Are you kidding me?" he snapped, brushing at the red stains spreading across his jacket. His voice was sharp enough to slice through the quiet, drawing every eye in the room. Maya stammered apologies, reaching for napkins, her hands trembling. But then words that froze her in place. "This is exactly what happens when places hire people like her." The silence deepened, heavy and suffocating. She felt dozens of eyes on her, the weight of their judgment pressing in. She knew what he meant. Not people like her as in waitresses. Not even people like her as in clumsy. But people like her as in black. The words carried centuries of venom, reducing her existence to a stereotype. And Daniel, her friend, her classmate, the boy who once said she would change the world, sat in silence. He didn't defend her. He didn't correct the man. He just let the words hang, poisoning the air. Her manager rushed in, face flushed, apologizing profusely to the men, promising their meals would be comped, promising it would never happen again. Then, turning to Maya, his voice cold and sharp, "Go. You're done here for the night." Maya stood frozen, humiliation flooding her veins. But beneath it, a fire burned. She had been silent before, shrinking, swallowing the pain. Not this time. She lifted her chin, her voice trembling, but loud enough for every ear in the diner to hear. "You think I don't know what you meant? I've lived my whole life hearing those words in different forms. But let me tell you, your silence, your comfort, your privilege don't make you better than me. They just prove the system is broken." Gasps rippled. A few clapped softly. Phones appeared, recording. And in that moment, the quiet war she had fought her whole life erupted into the open. Daniel's eyes met hers, heavy with something she couldn't read: shame, anger, fear. But his silence lingered, and it was louder than any insult. Maya turned and walked out, her heart pounding, the night air waiting to swallow her whole. But what she didn't know was that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The sound of broken glass still echoed in Maya's ears. Wine dripped from the table onto the floor, pooling around her shoes. For a second, the whole diner felt frozen, caught in that fragile silence before a storm. Then the man in the ruined suit spoke again, his voice slicing through the air like a blade. "Places like this never learn. This is what happens when they hire people like her." The word struck harder than the crash. People like her. Everyone knew what it meant. The insult wasn't about spilled wine, it was about skin. It was about centuries of hatred, sharpened into a single phrase. Maya's chest tightened. Her throat burned, but she swallowed the lump rising in it. She bent down quickly, trying to gather the shards of glass before her trembling hands betrayed her. But the silence in the diner was crushing. Too loud, too heavy. And then she heard it: laughter. One of the other men at the booth chuckled, shaking his head as if the insult were nothing more than a joke. Another muttered, "Unbelievable," while dabbing his sleeve with a napkin. Her eyes flicked up, almost against her will, searching for Daniel. For the boy who once sat on the bleachers and told her she could be unstoppable. For the friend who once believed in her fire. He sat there, calm, composed, sipping his drink like nothing had happened. His silence was deafening. His refusal to speak cut deeper than the words of the man in the suit. "Maya." Her manager's voice snapped her back. His face was tight with anger, though not at the man in the booth. At her. "That's enough. You've embarrassed us enough tonight. Go. You're done here. The humiliation landed like a slap. She wanted to disappear, wanted the floor to open beneath her and swallow her whole. But then another voice rose from the corner where a young couple had been watching. Did you hear what he just said to her? The woman asked, her voice sharp, directed at no one and everyone. Heads turned, phones lifted, screens glowed, and Maya realized this wasn't private anymore. Her shame, her pain was being recorded, captured, streamed into a world that might finally see it. Her hands shook, but something inside her shifted. For years, she had learned to be silent, to let the insults slide, to protect herself by staying small. But not tonight. Not in front of them. Not in front of him. She straightened, slowly, her hands still trembling, but her eyes steady. She spoke not in a whisper, not an apology, but loud enough for every person in that diner to hear. You think I don't know what you meant, she said, her voice quivering but strong. I've heard it my whole life. In classrooms, on sidewalks, in stores where I'm followed, in jobs where I have to work twice as hard for half the respect. You think a spilled drink gives you the right to strip me down to a stereotype? No, you don't get that power. A hush fell over the room. Even the clatter of dishes from the kitchen stopped. All eyes were on her. The man in the stained suit scoffed, but Maya didn't flinch. She turned her gaze to Daniel. And you, she said, her voice breaking slightly. You used to believe in me. You used to call me brilliant. You used to call me friend. And now, you sit there silent, while men like this stare me down. Your silence is louder than their insults. Your silence tells me exactly where you stand. Gasps rippled across the diner. Daniel's face remained still, but his eyes betrayed him. For a split second, the mask slipped, shame flickered there, raw and real. But he didn't speak. He didn't defend. Maya's chest heaved, the weight of years pressing against her ribs, but she didn't let herself fold. She let the fire spill out. You can strip me of this job. You can stain my clothes, bruise my pride, mock the color of my skin, but you cannot erase me. I am still here. I am still standing. And I am not your stereotype. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then, from somewhere in the back, slow claps began. A man at a corner table stood, his hands meeting loudly. Then another joined, and another. Soon, half the diner was applauding. Others recorded, their cameras capturing the moment, the fire in her eyes, the tremor in her voice, the raw courage of refusing to be erased. The man in the suit turned red with anger, muttering curses under his breath. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his hand tightening on his glass, but still he said nothing. Maya didn't wait for him to. She turned, her head high, her body trembling, and walked toward the door. Each step felt like a drum beat, pounding with the rhythm of her defiance. When she pushed the door open, the cool night air rushed in, wrapping around her like freedom. The applause still echoed behind her as the door swung shut. What she didn't know was that the videos taken that night wouldn't stay in that diner. They would travel out into the world, onto screens and timelines, into hearts that hadn't known the same pain. Her humiliation had been public, but so would her courage, and nothing, not even Daniel's silence, could erase that. The night air stung Maya's skin as she stepped out of the diner, her chest still heaving, her legs trembling with adrenaline. She half expected to collapse right there on the sidewalk, but instead, she stood still, the cool wind rushing through her hair, the muffled sounds of the diner fading behind her. For the first time that night, she could breathe, yet the echoes wouldn't leave her. The laughter, the insult, the silence that cut deeper than any word. She replayed it in her mind again and again, wondering if she'd done the right thing, if she'd made things worse. But the truth was, the moment had already slipped out of her hands. By morning, the videos were everywhere. Clips of Maya standing in the diner, her voice trembling but unbroken, spread across social media like wildfire. Strangers from across the world typed comments. I felt every word she said. This is what bravery looks like. Why do black women always have to be the ones to teach the lesson? The footage racked up thousands, then millions of views. News outlets replayed it, anchors dissecting the scene. Some headlines praised her courage. Others twisted the story waitress causes scene in restaurant. They wrote, as if her pain were the disruption, not the insult that sparked it. Maya sat on her couch, phone buzzing with notifications she could barely keep up with. Old classmates messaged her. Neighbors she barely spoke to stopped her on the street. Some said she'd inspired them. Others admitted they'd never realized how deep those wounds went until they heard her voice shake with truth. And then there were the messages from people she'd never met, black women and men who said, "I've lived that moment too. You spoke for me. Thank you for not staying silent." Each word lifted her, but also weighed on her, because with every thank you came the reminder this wasn't just her story. It was everyone's story. It was the story of generations, repeating itself in classrooms, offices, sidewalks, and diners across the country. But not every message was kind. Some were cruel, filled with the same poison she had faced that night. Anonymous accounts calling her names, telling her she was overreacting, that she should know her place. Others defended the men in suits, twisting the narrative, insisting she was the one who brought race into it. And worst of all was Daniel. He never reached out, never apologized, not a text, not a call. He vanished into silence, just as he had that night. That hurt more than the stranger's hatred, because Daniel wasn't a stranger. He was a memory, a promise, a piece of her past that now felt broken beyond repair. Still, Maya refused to crumble. One evening, she stood in front of her bathroom mirror, staring at the reflection of a woman who no longer felt small. Her voice had cracked, her body had trembled, but she had not bowed. And in that diner, in that moment, she had done something that once felt impossible. She had spoken. Her words had traveled farther than she ever could have imagined. Community groups began reaching out, asking her to share her story. She stood on stages, in auditoriums, even on live streams, her heart pounding every time, but her voice steady. She spoke not just of the diner, but of every invisible wound racism carves into daily life, the looks, the whispers, the doors that closed before you even reached them. And slowly, she began to realize what happened that night wasn't just humiliation. It was transformation. But here's the haunting truth. Maya's story was not rare. For every diner where someone stood and spoke, there were countless others where silence reigned. Countless others where no cameras were recording. Countless others where the insult went unchallenged. The victim went home carrying the weight alone. That is the impact of racism. It is not just one man's words or one friend's silence. It is a system, a cycle, a shadow that creeps into ordinary lives and leaves scars that last a lifetime. And yet stories like Maya's remind us of something else too. They remind us of the power of voice, of courage, of the refusal to vanish quietly into the night. Because when one person speaks, others listen. And when others listen, change, slow, fragile, but real, becomes possible. Maya didn't walk away from that diner unchanged. She carried the pain. She carried the loss of a friendship that once defined her. She carried the reminder that even silence can wound. But she also carried something new. She carried the fire of defiance. The videos would fade. The headlines would shift. But her words, that moment when she stood tall, voice cracking but unbroken, would remain. The question is, how many more Mayas must there be before the world finally listens? How many more voices will be forced to rise from humiliation and pain before silence is no longer an option? And for those watching now, for those who hear her story, who feel the weight of her words, the question lingers. When the moment comes, when injustice stands before you, will you stay silent? Or will you speak? Because silence is never neutral. Silence is a choice. And tonight, somewhere, someone else is walking into their own diner, facing their own moment. The only question is, whose side will you be on when it happens again?